Thanks for watching. This is James, and we're going to go over a lease for Vantage Parkway. So we're going to start off with the first page. This is a boilerplate lease. So we don't have any of the tenant information put in here. Normally, that's where the tenant address, trade name, the guarantor, all of these things will be populated by the landlord. So we're going to get that after we finish negotiations of all the points. But for now, all of the relevant language in this lease that we need to kind of talk about is here, and we're going to go through that, and I'll be available to answer any questions you have. So on this part of the lease, you have just the basic descriptive information, the shopping center address here, the premises, which is the property itself, the commencement date on when we will actually take occupancy. The commencement date is essentially when you start the lease. So if we have 4 months free rent, which we've negotiated on this deal, then the commencement date, let's say that 4 months free rent starts in September, that's going to be the commencement date. Okay. Now, if the free rent is outside of the term, then the commencement date would actually start 4 months after, or when the free rent period is done. For the purpose of this deal, the commencement date is going to start when we take occupancy, and that's when the free rent period is going to start as well. Since most of the things on this page just need to be populated, there's nothing here we need to really discuss until we get that information in there. Then it's just a simple matter of checking to make sure all the information is accurate. So I'm going to move on to the second page. On this page of the lease, this is more information that needs to be populated here. So this talks about the delivery of premises on Article 3. This language basically speaks toward how the landlord will hand over the premises. Other exhibits will detail the construction that's going to be built out, but this paragraph is basically telling you that you're going to accept the property as is, where when it's delivered to you, that they're not responsible for anything else after it's handed over. This goes into detail on a specific language, but essentially that's what it's telling you, is this is how we would deliver the property. We're going to build it out for you, and after that, it's up to you to maintain it. It's also important to note here in section 3.2 that with the delivery section, that if they deliver the property to you and it becomes vacant, they're saying that the landlord's not going to be in default. They're still going to expect you to be responsible for the suite itself. Okay, let's move on to the next page. On this page, one thing of note is the relocation clause. This is something that we always try to change. Right now, the landlord is saying here that he can give you a written 30-day notice in which you would have to move essentially with at least 30 days after the notice is given, and they would pay for your moving costs, the reconstruction cost, and a reasonable amount of reprinting of any materials to notify people of your new address. This is something that we adjust. It's very hard to remove the relocation clause, but what we typically do is we'll push this out. Instead of 30 days, we're going to ask for half a year. Now, I will tell you, in the 10 years I've been doing commercial real estate, I have never had a relocation done. It's simply too expensive for these landlords to do that. The only way they would do a relocation clause is if someone was taking a full floor. For this particular property, that's not applicable. Okay, so this is one of those things that you can fight to strike all of this language, but the chances of this actually happening are so small. And if we get the 180 days instead of 30 days, that makes it so difficult to actually work around the language we put into the lease that's usually almost always sufficient. So my recommendation is just to push the 30 days to 180 days, which I've done in another revision that you guys will get later today. Now, as you can see here, section 4.2 percentage rent is deleted. That's for deals where the landlord actually participates in what profits you make and your rent's based on profits. That's not happening here. That's why it's deleted. This language here with gross sales, this usually goes along with percentage rent, where the landlord actually knows what you make, and you report to the landlord on a monthly or some periodic basis. And but for the purposes of this lease, this is just a definition of gross sales, so we're going to leave it there, but percentage rent will not apply to you. As far as payment of rent goes, just know that if you are late, you're going to have a 10% charge in rent. So I highlighted it here. Let me show you where it says that here. So the tenant will pay landlord a late charge of an amount equal to 10% of the rent due. So let's not be late in paying rent. Now, on this section with sales reports, Article 5, sales reports, records, and financial statements, I'm moving to strike section 5.1, 5.2, and 5.3. We don't want the landlord to be able to audit us. We don't want the landlord to have our financial records. And we don't want the landlord to be expecting sales reports from us. This is something that's essential for a percentage rent lease, not for a typical lease that we're doing here. So we would move to strike these. They may counter some of this. It's 50-50 chance. If they do, we can talk about ways we can meet in the middle here. But I typically like to remove all of this, so that's my recommendation. Okay, now that we're in Article 6, for Section 6.1, personal property taxes, this language basically states that the tenant's responsible for all taxes levied against their personal property and trade fixtures. So if you have any property that's increasing the tax value here, the landlord's saying you are responsible for that, and that if the landlord by some chance their property is affected by the value of your property there, they're saying they're going to charge you on demand for the taxes that you would owe, that you're liable for that. So in essence, if you have assets that increase the value, which in your case for this particular deal, that's not going to be a problem, then if it were the case, then you would be charged for those taxes. Now, section 6.2, this discusses that the tenant will pay their, we call it pro rata share. Let's say that you are 2% of the whole complex based on your square footage. You're going to pay about 2% of the common area maintenance, taxes, and insurance. This just details how that's laid out. Okay, it also details when you are responsible for paying it. Now, Article 7 with common areas, this details which areas the landlord designates as common areas. It also shows you kind of where your CAM charges are going. That common area maintenance fee, it goes for paying for the parking lots, the landscaping, the curbs, loading areas, sidewalks, promenades, lighting facilities, etc. So this lays out what is designated as a common area. That's important because if CAM charges are out of whack in the future, I want you to call me to check that. But you can also look here to see what the landlord is designating as a common area. If they charge us for something that's not listed here, call me so we can get into that. Okay, I'm going to skip down to section 7.4. This whole section here further details how CAM charges are going to be assessed and how they're going to be paid here. So read this for more details on what exactly you're going to be charged. They're going to give you an estimate on there, and you have the right to actually audit that statement when you do receive it, and that's further detailed here. Now, something that's important to note here, there's a 15% charge for administrative cost. That's very common in deals like this. Most large centers have a 15, the lowest I've seen is 10% charge for administrative costs. That's essentially the property management firm or the property manager that is hired to push all of this paper. And if you're thinking, well, that's not fair, why don't they just pay the person directly? One statement I would say on these leases, it's good to be landlord, because there are certain things that they will do in almost all cases, and it's not fair, but that's the nature of how it's laid out. There's really nothing we can do to eliminate this. All we can do is try to fight to reduce it to maybe 10%. It's a negligible cost when you're talking about 15% of the common area charge, which in your case may be a couple $100s a month. So you may be paying about 50 to $100 a month for this charge specifically. I want to point out for Article 8 that there's a Merchant Association Promotional Fund. This basically means that if the landlord, right now, I don't think they have one, but if they do put together a merchant fund, that's something that would help everybody in the center. They're saying that you're automatically bought into that. This is very common for these type of centers. If you were in a city center or another big complex like this, they want everyone to be able to participate if they need to, kind of put together a big marketing campaign. So this is something that you can try to remove, but it's very unlikely they'll allow you to do that because they want to kind of have that merchant association that's important for a development like this. With that being said, the cost cannot exceed $1 per square foot per annum. Okay, so it shows you what your maximum exposure is on this. And for the sake of this deal, that's again, it's a negligible cost if we have it. So is it worth it to try to strike it? I don't think so in this case because, again, they don't have it. And if they were to have it, it's something that would benefit everyone. And it's going to be a negligible amount of money. You can read this to figure out exactly how much you're going to be exposed to. Okay, so we have a lot to cover, and I know this is becoming a long video, so I'm going to point out the items that are really important to look at. And so if you have questions on things that I skip, please contact me or email me. For Article 9, Use and Care of Demised Premise, these sections go into detail on how your expectations from the landlord, on how you will conduct yourself in the property, what you are responsible for, which is usually everything within the four walls, and what happens if there is a violation. It also talks about what you are not able to do. Like, here's an example. You can't do an auction or go out of business sale. You can't sell secondhand goods in the property. You can't turn it into something that is not meant to be. They just want to keep up the first class look of the center. And also it's important to note here that they will not allow you to use or occupy the property for anything other than what we say we're going to do. Okay, so they have an idea and they've already approved our use. They don't want you changing that and turning this into a garage sale essentially. This doesn't apply to this particular client, but it is a problem for some centers. So that language, I just want to point that out, that whatever you come in doing, that's what they want you to continue to do for the entire term. So make sure that the use that we list out is comprehensive. And that's something we'll get into when we discuss this. Also, you need to have a neat, attractive place to basically keep it up. These are just common sense things that most people know to do. They're just putting it in writing so that it can be enforced if it became a problem. I'm going to breeze through maintenance and repairs because this being an office space in this particular case, there's not much we have to work on. You just need to keep it clean and habitable. The tenant will be responsible for HVAC. Now, in this particular case, we may have to strike that because of where we are. This is not a retail space, it's the office part of Vantage Parkway. So section 10.3 needs to be stricken. And also 10.4. If this was retail, these would be applicable. But because this is office, we're going to try to get this taken off because we want the landlord to be responsible. That's usually what the market is for office space. Now, when we get to this article dealing with alterations, it's important to note that the landlord wants you to ask them for whatever work you want to do on the space. So if you're going ahead and you're trying to add, some wood flooring, or you want to add some nice eclectic look, they want a heads up because they want to be able to approve that and make sure that it's something that fits the form and function of the overall center itself. So we still have a little bit of freedom here. Just make sure before you start any projects after you move in that we do discuss it with the landlord first. This lays out expectations. Okay, so dealing with the article's landlord right of access, from time to time, if there's a problem, let's say that there's a leak in one of the suites, the landlord wants the right to be able to go in and fix a problem. They may not give you notice, so they're going to have a master key that they are allowed to get in there, and landlord's right of access talks about that. Signs and storefronts, it just talks about the rules regarding what kind of sign you can have, the size of the sign, and usually there's a reference to an exhibit here that will give you more detail if we need to. In this particular case, because it's office space, not that applicable, we just want to make sure we have the right to put signage on the glass doors in the front and signage prominently displayed inside the suite. So we will add that for 13.1. Okay, so when it comes to insurance here, the market is usually for this space a $1 million, $2 million aggregate limit. Here it's twice as high. For a monthly cost, we're not talking about much money. For your particular space, we're talking about maybe $150 a month for your liability insurance. We're going to try to reduce this for 1 million per occurrence and 2 million general aggregate. That's usually all you need for your type of use. So that's something we're going to push. The landlord's just pushing this because that's, it's a higher class center. They want to make sure that everyone has more than enough coverage. Our argument is, well, it costs us a little bit more money, so we just need the coverage that we need. We're not going to go overboard if we don't have to. So that's going to be a revised, a suggested revision. Now, I skipped ahead a little bit to the next point, assignment and subletting. The tenant will not assign or transfer this lease. Now, here's the $1 million phrase that we want to know. The landlord will not unreasonably withhold the right to sublease the space. When you see this language here, that's important for us because we want to make sure that we can sublease this when it comes time to do so, and if it becomes time to do so. So the way that it's written out, it does give us the avenue to do that. The landlord will still need to give consent to that, but that's very, very normal. I can assure you that when you find a good credit tenant that meets all of their requirements, which is not difficult, especially since you are a newer business, the assumption is if they accepted you, then they should accept anyone that's in the same position. And since you're a newer business, it's far easier to find people that have a few more years of experience out there. So I feel really good about when we find a tenant, it's going to be very hard for them to say that, they're not going to be as well set up as you are. So this language is acceptable from a business perspective, in my opinion. If you want to read the rest of the language here, this just talks about what's important to the landlord and how a sublease would actually work out. Article 20 talks about estoppel certificates, subordination. I'll speak on the estoppel certificates. From time to time, you may get a request to fill out a letter that specifies how much you pay in rent, how long you've been at the center. This is for investment purposes. So a estoppel certificate is just a document that basically proves what you pay and that you are a tenant there. And I don't have a problem with my clients filling it out when it is requested. And the only problem I usually have is if they have some kind of penalty for not doing it, which in this case, it doesn't seem like they do. So we're fine here. Okay, as I look at the rest of this here, the landlord's contractual security interest, I'm going to skip that. If you have questions, let me know. Holding over at the end of your lease, if you don't have an agreement set up, they're going to charge you twice the rent. We're talking 5 years from now if we don't renegotiate and your lease expires. This is put there purely to incentivize you to renew or prepare to move. So it's not going to be an issue. We should always be looking for space at least a year before your lease expires here. This article deals with notices. So if the landlord needs to give you a notice in writing or by email, this lays out how that would happen and what expectations are. Okay, and this article deals with commissions for Dunhill Partners as well as our firm as well. It shows the details there. And everything else here, miscellaneous, I don't see anything else that requires us to kind of touch base on. I'm scanning through this quickly, but understand that I've already read this document 2 or 3 times. So I want to say at the end of this video that I can answer any questions you have on the lease. There's a lot of things here that we did not cover, but as far as from a business perspective and the market perspective, looking at what is very common in leases, from us looking at hundreds and hundreds of leases, I want to say that this is a fairly good lease. It's a fairly balanced lease, as much as a lease can be balanced. They are highly in favor of the landlord here, but this one is not nearly as bad as some of the ones that I've experienced. And so I want to tell you that I feel good about with the changes that we'd like to make to this lease, which I think are minimal. We're in a good spot here, and this is something that I would feel comfortable signing. If you need legal advice, if you have a legal question, we have several attorneys we can refer to you. So I hope this information was helpful. This is a very, very long video, but thank you for watching.